Before she had a television studio, she did not even have indoor plumbing. Before the billionaire status, she was a little girl in rural Mississippi wearing dresses made from potato sacks. Then, she made one decision that changed everything. Stop being the talent and start owning the show. That move eventually helped build a fortune worth roughly $3.4 billion and gave rise to the richest black family in Mississippi. But we are saving that full story for number 1. First, you will meet a family that bought a shopping center after banks kept saying no, a bricklayer's son who became football's GOAT, and a Mississippi kid whose TV network sold for $3 billion. Let's count them down. Number 8. The Remenank family. Imagine walking into a bank with a plan to buy an entire shopping center, getting turned down, trying another bank, getting told no again, and instead of taking the hint, deciding the banks must be the ones who do not understand the assignment. That is basically how the Remenank family enters this list. Tony Remenank Jr., his wife and their 3 sons built Remenank & Company as a family operation in Mississippi. And in 2022, they pulled off the kind of deal that immediately changes how people look at a local business. The family bought a 20-unit strip mall in the Oak Grove area of Hattiesburg in a 7-figure transaction, then announced plans to turn it into Greenwood Plaza, a modern commercial hub inspired by the old Black Wall Street idea. And here is the important part. This was not some billionaire walking into a closing with a suitcase of cash. Reporting on the deal says Remenank had banks reject his financing requests while he was trying to secure the property before it ever officially hit the market. That is a very different kind of wealth story. It is not, I inherited a portfolio. It is, I can see the portfolio before anybody else believes it exists. The family already had another commercial development under its company, so Greenwood Plaza became the second major expansion of the operation. Their plan was not merely to collect rent either. They wanted the property to house and encourage more Black-owned businesses, essentially using one family asset to create space for dozens of other entrepreneurs. Think about the psychology of that for a second. Most people see a half-empty strip mall and think, that place needs a new grocery store. An entrepreneur sees 20 doors and starts calculating rent. Remenank saw 20 doors and thought, what if this becomes an ecosystem? That is a different brain setting entirely. Now, compared with the billion-dollar names coming later, the Remenanks are still building. But that is exactly why they belong here at number 8. You are watching the wealth machine while the gears are still visible. And if buying a shopping center after the banks tell you no sounds stubborn, our next family dealt with something worse. They were told they could grow the fish, but nobody wanted to finance them, process them, or even let them into the game. Number 7. The Scott family. Number 7 starts with 1,900 acres of Mississippi Delta land and a problem that would have made most farmers quit before the first pond was even filled. The Scott family had been farming around Drew, Mississippi for generations. Ed Scott Sr. accumulated a substantial amount of land before the Great Depression and became Mississippi's first African-American rice farmer in 1948. By the time he died in the 1950s, the family controlled roughly 1,900 acres. So when his son Ed Scott Jr. looked across the Delta in the late 1970s and noticed farmers making money from catfish, he did what any quietly dangerous entrepreneur does. He copied the good idea, then tried to do it better. He dug 8 ponds with his own equipment. The ponds were ready. The opportunity was obvious. All he needed was financing to stock them. And this is where the story gets almost cartoonishly unfair. Scott said a federal agricultural supervisor refused him a loan, then approved a white farmer he knew for millions of dollars in catfish financing. So Ed went around the supervisor, contacted the state office directly, and secured a $150,000 loan. That stocked the ponds with about 600,000 fingerlings. Problem solved, right? Not even close. When his fish reached processing size, white-owned plants refused to clean and package them. So Scott built his own processing operation. That decision turned him from a farmer into a vertically integrated businessman before vertical integration became the kind of phrase people throw around on podcasts. By 1990, his pond fresh operation was producing around 2 million pounds of catfish a year, supporting about 35 employees and eventually winning government contracts to supply military facilities. The family even expanded into a seafood restaurant venture. That is the part I love about this story. Every time somebody put up a gate, Scott basically responded by buying the land behind the gate, digging a pond beside it, and building his own door. Financing problem? Find another office. Processing problem? Build a plant. Distribution problem? Go win contracts. The Scott fortune was never publicly marked with a neat Forbes number, but the family built the kind of asset older Southern wealth understands very well: land, production, and control over the thing that leaves the farm. Now, the Scotts turned discrimination into infrastructure. Our next Mississippi-born family turned a $250 loan into hair products so culturally powerful that they ended up on Soul Train and Wall Street. Speaking of families who answered every closed door with a smarter move, a lot of it comes down to how the brain performs when it matters. That's the idea behind an audio series called The Genius Switch. It's based on the neuroscience of the flow state, that mode where focus and creativity click at the same time. And the whole routine is just listening with headphones a few minutes a day. It's a one-time $39, less than a single online course, and it's backed by a 90-day money-back guarantee, so you can test it on yourself with nothing to lose. If you're watching on your TV, pause and scan the QR code on screen with your phone camera or tap the first link in the description. Now, back to Mississippi and a company born from a loan the banks laughed at. Number 6. The Johnson family. Here is a business origin story that sounds fake until you realize the punchline is an actual Wall Street listing. George E. Johnson Sr. was born in Richton, Mississippi in 1927 and grew up poor after his mother moved the family north to Chicago. As a kid, he shined shoes, cleared restaurant tables, and set up pins in a bowling alley. Years later, after working for another black-owned cosmetics company, he saw an opportunity in a hair straightening product for black men. He needed $250 to start the business. The bank was not exactly excited about financing a young black entrepreneur selling hair products in the 1950s. So according to the family history reported by the Associated Press, Johnson eventually convinced a banker that the money was for a vacation with his wife. That vacation became Johnson Products Company. George and his wife Joan started the business in 1954 and built brands like Ultra Sheen and Afro Sheen, products that became deeply tied to the Black is Beautiful movement. The company sponsored Soul Train, which is one of those marketing moves that looks obvious now but was brilliant at the time. Do not just buy commercials. Put your product inside the cultural event everybody is watching. Then came the historic part. Johnson Products became the first black-owned company listed on the American Stock Exchange. Let that breathe for a second. A man who once had to disguise a $250 business loan as vacation money eventually took a black hair care company onto a major American exchange. That is a sentence with range. The company was sold in 1993 in a deal worth more than $60 million. Johnson then moved into banking, helped build Independence Bank, supported other black businesses, and created an educational fund that awarded more than 1,000 college scholarships. His children and grandchildren carried the entrepreneurial legacy forward as well. And George made it to 99 years old, passing away in July 2026. That means he lived long enough to watch a business he started with $250 borrowed dollars become part of American business history. Now, Johnson built his hands around hair products. Our next Mississippi family built its fortune around a pair of hands that were trained, quite literally, by catching bricks. Number 5. The Rice family. Jerry Rice became the greatest receiver football has ever seen, and apparently the first training facility was his father's construction site. Rice grew up in Crawford, Mississippi, one of 8 children in a working family. His father, Joe, was a brick mason, and Jerry helped him on jobs. The work built his hands and grip strength so dramatically that his college coach later joked Rice could catch a BB in the dark. You hear athletes talk about old-school training all the time. Jerry Rice's version involved actual bricks. That is hard to beat. The funniest part is that football was not even the original plan. Rice did not start playing until high school, and one version of the story says a principal noticed how fast he was while Jerry was running away after cutting class. Imagine getting caught skipping school and accidentally beginning the greatest receiving career in NFL history. That is the kind of punishment that really backfires on the school system. Rice stayed in Mississippi for college at Mississippi Valley State, where he and quarterback Willie Totten turned the offense into something called the Satellite Express. By the time Rice finished, he had destroyed school and NCAA receiving records and earned the nickname World because, as the story went, there was not a ball in the world he could not catch. Then came 20 NFL seasons, 3 Super Bowl titles, a Super Bowl MVP, and a record book that still looks like somebody forgot to turn the difficulty setting up. His career totals include 1,549 catches, 22,895 receiving yards, and 197 receiving touchdowns. But here is where the family angle gets interesting. Rice did not simply retire and live off autograph money. In 2019, he and his family launched GOAT Fuel, turning the nickname everybody had already given him into a privately held lifestyle and energy brand. That is a very clean little piece of business judo. If the public insists on calling you the greatest of all time, eventually you might as well put it on a can. Rice lives outside Mississippi today, but the wealth story begins unmistakably in Crawford. Brick dust, a huge family, a tiny school, and hands that were trained before anybody realized what they were being trained for. Now, Rice turned Mississippi's strength into receiving records. Our next family produced a man who grew up sleeping on his grandmother's couch and now has an NFL contract worth nearly $159 million. Number 4. The Jones family. Chris Jones is 6'6", more than 300 pounds, and one of the most expensive defensive players football has ever seen. But the house that built him was very small. Jones grew up in Houston, Mississippi, a town of only a few thousand people, and spent much of his childhood in his grandmother Flora's home. Chiefs reporting describes that house as the kind of place where the door was open to everybody. Family, neighbors, whoever needed somewhere to stay, somebody could probably make room. At one point, Jones has described sleeping on his grandmother's couch. That matters because fast forward a few years, and this same kid is negotiating numbers that sound like municipal budgets. After starring at Mississippi State, Jones went to Kansas City in the second round of the 2016 NFL Draft and became the center of the Chiefs' defense through a championship run that has basically turned February into their annual business trip. In 2024, Kansas City gave him a 5-year contract worth $158.75 million, with $101 million in guarantees. $101 million guaranteed. For pushing very large men backward. And he earned it. Jones has stacked All-Pro selections, Pro Bowls, and Super Bowl rings while becoming one of the faces of the Chiefs dynasty. But despite all the money and celebrity, he keeps circling back to Houston. Team profiles have documented him returning to church with his grandmother, giving back through charitable work and crediting that crowded little house for the way he treats people. There is something satisfying about the asset math here. His grandmother's home had more people than bedrooms. His current contract can pay him tens of millions in a single season. The distance between those two facts is almost difficult to process. And Chris is still playing, which makes the Jones family different from most of this list. The fortune is not a finished museum piece. The checks are still arriving. In 2026 alone, his contract structure calls for more than $35 million in cash compensation. That is not generational wealth yet. But unless somebody develops a truly catastrophic hobby involving yachts and volcanoes, the next generation has a very different starting line than Chris did. Now, Jones left Mississippi to become a football superstar. Our next man became one of Hollywood's most recognizable voices on earth, then did something almost nobody at that level does. He came back home because New York started feeling like a cave. Number 3. The Freeman family. Morgan Freeman can live almost anywhere on the planet. He chose Mississippi. That is more interesting than it sounds. Freeman was born in Memphis but spent his early childhood in Charleston, Mississippi, in the Delta. He eventually left, lived in major cities, and built one of the most durable acting careers in Hollywood. Oscar winner, Shawshank Redemption, Million Dollar Baby, The Dark Knight films. And of course that voice which could probably narrate your grocery list and somehow make the bananas sound important. But in the 1980s, Freeman started coming back to Mississippi and realized something. He has said that the tall buildings and concrete of New York made him feel like he was living in a cave, while the Delta was where he actually relaxed. So he moved home. Then he noticed another problem. Tourists kept showing up in Clarksdale asking a very simple question: where can we reliably hear the blues? And weirdly, there was not always a reliable answer. So Freeman and his partners created one. Ground Zero Blues Club opened in Clarksdale in 2001, giving the city a permanent venue built around the music the Delta gave the world. More than 2 decades later, Freeman is still listed as an owner, and in 2026, he was promoting a whole symphonic blues project designed to carry that history to new audiences. That is a very Morgan Freeman business move. He did not open a vodka brand. He did not launch an app. He opened a juke joint because tourists could not find enough blues in the birthplace of the blues. And the Mississippi lifestyle gets even better. Freeman has maintained a large ranch near Charleston and turned part of the property into a haven for bees, bringing in hives and planting for pollinators. So somewhere in Mississippi, the voice of God from half your favorite movies is effectively running a blues club and worrying about bees. His exact private balance sheet is not publicly disclosed, but decades of major film earnings, real estate, and business holdings make Freeman one of the most substantial black fortunes with a true present-day Mississippi home base. Now, Freeman used Hollywood money to come back to the Delta. Our next man left rural Mississippi as a boy, invented an entire black television network, sold it for $3 billion, and became the first black billionaire in American history. Number 2. The Robert Johnson family. Robert L. Johnson's billion-dollar idea started with a pen and somebody else's business plan. Johnson was born in Hickory, Mississippi, one of 10 children. His family moved to Illinois when he was young, and he eventually became the only one of the 10 to graduate from college. By his 30s, he was working around Washington and the growing cable television industry when he saw a presentation for a channel aimed at older viewers. According to Forbes' account of the story, Johnson looked at the proposal, and every time it said elderly, he mentally replaced it with something else. Black. That was the idea. A television network built specifically for black audiences at a time when mainstream television largely treated that audience like an afterthought. Johnson scraped together financing, including a $15,000 bank loan, and convinced cable billionaire John Malone to back the concept. Black Entertainment Television launched in 1980. It eventually became the first black-owned company to trade on the New York Stock Exchange. Then Johnson did the move that changes the entire wealth story. In 1998, he took BET private at a valuation around $1.3 billion. 3 years later, he sold it to Viacom for roughly $3 billion. That sale made him America's first black billionaire. Think about the arc. A child from a 10-kid Mississippi household looks at a cable pitch, changes one word in his head, and ends up creating enough value to break a racial barrier in the billionaire class. And Johnson did not disappear after the sale. He built RLJ companies across private equity, auto dealerships, and hotels. He led a group that bought the Charlotte Bobcats for $300 million in 2003, making him the first black majority owner of a major U.S. professional sports franchise, then later sold control to Michael Jordan. As of 2026, Forbes again estimates Johnson's fortune at roughly $1 billion. So why is he only number 2? Because Mississippi produced one black media entrepreneur whose ownership lesson went even further. She did not just build a network for an audience. She learned to own the show, the studio, and the profits. And that decision turned poverty in Kosciuszko into billions. Number 1. The Winfrey family. Now we come back to the little girl from The Hook. Oprah Winfrey was born in Kosciuszko, Mississippi in 1954 to a teenage mother. She spent her earliest years with her grandmother in rural poverty, without indoor plumbing, and has spoken about wearing dresses made from potato sacks. If you were writing this as fiction, an editor might tell you the contrast is too obvious. Potato sacks to billionaire media owner? A little on the nose, except it happened. But Oprah did not become worth roughly $3.4 billion simply because she was an extraordinary television host. Plenty of television hosts become rich. Oprah became Oprah rich because she figured out ownership. That distinction is the whole story. After moving through radio and local television, she took over a struggling Chicago morning program in 1984 and rapidly pushed it from last place to first. The show became nationally syndicated as The Oprah Winfrey Show in 1986. At that point, She could have accepted the traditional deal. Be the star, collect a massive salary, smile for the cameras, and let somebody else own the machine. Instead, she built Harpo Productions and fought for ownership of her program. Forbes has described that decision as the move that transformed her from a highly paid employee into a capitalist. Her company ultimately controlled the show and its production infrastructure, which meant the explosive profits no longer flowed past Oprah before she received a salary. They flowed through Oprah. That is such a simple distinction, but financially it is enormous. Being paid well makes you wealthy. Owning the thing paying everybody can make you a billionaire. The show ran for 25 seasons. Harpo expanded into film and television production. Oprah later launched OWN, built a huge investment portfolio, and accumulated major real estate holdings. Forbes estimates that reinvested profits from the show and her film work alone account for more than $2.8 billion of her wealth. And here is what makes the Mississippi beginning matter. The first black female billionaire in American history came from a state where her childhood home did not even have indoor plumbing. She did not inherit a studio. She did not inherit stock. She did not inherit a family office. What she inherited was a name that was actually supposed to be Orpah from the Bible, but people kept pronouncing it Oprah, and somehow even the typo became a global brand. There is no traditional Winfrey business dynasty with children waiting to take over, which makes this family story unusual. Oprah never had children, so her legacy has been built less like a hereditary company and more like an institution. Harpo, OWN, films, scholarships, education programs, and the leadership academy she built in South Africa all extend the name beyond one person's career. And that may be the cleanest lesson in this entire countdown. The Scotts owned land. The Johnsons owned products. Jerry Rice owned records. Robert Johnson owned a network. Oprah learned to own the platform underneath her own fame. That is why the little girl from Kosciuszko sits at number 1. And those were 8 of the biggest black wealth stories tied to Mississippi, from Delta farmland and catfish ponds to football contracts, Hollywood, cable television, and finally a media empire built around one very expensive lesson: ownership beats applause. So, which story surprised you the most? The farmer who built his own processing plant? The banker who accidentally financed a hair care empire disguised as a vacation? Or Oprah going from potato sack dresses to a $3.4 billion fortune? Drop your pick in the comments, hit the like button if one of these stories caught you off guard, and subscribe to Black Status. We will see you in the next one.